All right, let's talk about what's going on in the Temple Mount. Any updates on the Temple Mount and maybe this spring? I mean, here we are, February, April's coming, and they want to sacrifice a lamb up on the Temple Mount.
Yeah.
And the man that's in charge of the Temple Mount and the police now,
Yeah.
he tried doing this himself back in 2006.
This is the big one. This is the big one. Since our new government has been implemented a couple of months ago, our internal security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, a very staunch right-winger, he is now in control not only of the Mossad, not only of the Shabak, not only of the border control, the police, but he's also in charge now of the Temple Mount security.
Mm.
And this is a very hot spot. It will only, in my opinion, it will only continue to get hotter. And you know the Palestinian Authority and the sheikhs and the Waqf, the Islamic control who controls up there, they know it, and they've been causing trouble. When Itamar Ben-Gvir went up on the Temple Mount about 2 months ago, they rioted a few days later. Then, just over a week ago, we had a terrorist go into a synagogue in Jerusalem and murder 8 people. And so there's been a little bit of a new wave of terror at the moment. So unstable, tensious, but we have an excellent security. We have excellent military and police intelligence, and they're working night and day to.
So do you think we'll have a temple sacrifice April, come Passover?
Personally, I don't think it's going to be as soon as that, unless there is a stronger movement among the
Do you
right
think someone will
wing.
go up there and try it?
If someone does go up and try it, Brannon, they're going to create such chaos, and it may take that to get the snowball rolling even faster. I personally, my feeling is no, they're not going to, but you never know.
All right.
It only takes one person that has this radical sense of divine calling to do that, and he'll do it.
Right.
And here's the thing: if just like in the Muslim world, just like in the Christian world, the same in the Jewish world, if they believe that they have divine inspiration and they're doing what God calls them to do, nothing will stop them, and that's kind of a concern. On the other hand, this is sometimes historically how things happen. Things get moving,
Right.
and if there's going to be a rebuilt temple, which the way I see it, it's kind of like the Book of Esther. If you look at the Book of Esther, there's no mention of God in the Book of Esther, right? Not one mention. In fact, when the rabbis and the sages were canonizing and codifying the scriptures, choosing what books and what not books to include in the Bible, they seriously were thinking of leaving out the Book of Esther because of that, because there's no mention of God. But if you read the Book of Esther and you see the chain of events, the line of events, and you put it all together, clearly you see God operating behind the scenes in that book. And in fact, that's one of the key themes of the Book of Esther, the hiddenness of God, because he's not mentioned. Esther is told to hide her identity by Mordecai. And that's why when we celebrate Purim, the Feast of Esther, we dress up in costumes to hide our identity. And also, by the way, you may not know this, but it's the one day of the year that the Orthodox Jews say it's okay to get drunk.
Really?
Yeah. Why? They get drunk because they say when you're out of control, because that's what happens when you get drunk. You and I wouldn't know that, but the story of Esther is when the Jewish people, they were not in control of their destiny. There was an evil man called Haman who spun the lot, and it fell on a day that every Jew was going to get murdered. And so it's a reminder, when we're not in control, there's an unseen God who is in control. Mm. And the story of Esther, I like to use as what's going on here with the plans to rebuild the temple. We don't see God, but we see the red heifers, 5 red heifers coming to Israel. We see this a young group of men, this priesthood being trained up that's been hidden.
The Levites.
The Levites. We see now a ultra-Orthodox right-wing man who's in the position
Right.
of the head of not only the security, but the head of the security of the Temple Mount.
Right.
We see the Orthodox people, they have purchased a plot of land on the Mount of Olives that they're going to sacrifice that first red heifer in probably just under 2 years. So if you put the pieces of the puzzle together, to me, I see it, the hand of the Lord behind this. And even though I believe the scriptures say that one day that temple, which Jesus himself calls the house of God, my house,
Right.
will be a house of prayer. So he calls it my house. And even though one day I see that house of God, it's going to be desolated,
Yeah.
as Daniel prophesied, as Jesus prophesied in Matthew 24. But if I may say, one other really interesting new element that's kind of been snowballing more and more in these last few months, the organization that is really in charge of implementing what's going on regarding the building of the temple, when they first received these 5 red heifers, they actually received, the first red heifer that was found was a Jewish farmer from Tennessee, I believe, from Tennessee, it was Tennessee. He was Jewish. He called the Sanhedrin. He showed them the red heifer. He said it was unblemished. They checked. They saw it was unblemished. They offered him $1 million. He said, I won't take $1. I'll give it to the people of Israel and the state of Israel as a gift.
And I know there are some guys down in Mississippi doing this too.
So then there were people in Mississippi and here in Tennessee, Christian farmers, and they came up with a number of red heifers, including these 5 red heifers.
Now that's coming out of Texas.
And that's also coming out of Texas and Tennessee and Mississippi and other places. It's really snowballing.
All the Bible Belt, by the way.
The Bible Belt, where we are here. And of course, I'm seeing churches every few hundred meters down the road.
And they're big too, aren't they?
They're incredible. Baptist church, I think I can't remember how many I've counted.
But as I warned you, most of them I wouldn't even call churches. They're social clubs.
Right.
And they wouldn't have much, most of them would not allow you to speak.
Yeah.
They would say they're pro-Israel, but it isn't reflected in their preaching, some of them. And some of them, they aren't pro-Israel. They're actually anti-Semites hiding behind replacement theology.
Very sad, very grievous. But
that's not been the case until the last 20 years.
Right. Well,
I mean, otherwise you would have had, part of that, you had very strong defenders of Israel in many of these churches and teaching Bible prophecy and very interested. But in the last 20 years, there's been a revolution in our seminaries and our theology. And the neo-Calvinism and Calvinism is now taking over so many of them, just as it's taken over the Southern Baptist Convention.
Yeah, and there are other denominations.
Abominations
that is the
works.
same.
That works too.
The Church of Scotland is the same. They were very strong supporters of Israel. Now they're very much into replacement theology. But going back to these Christian farmers who are coming up with these red heifers, they are the ones that are providing the red heifers for these Jewish organizations. Now, these Jewish organizations, seriously, what I'm telling you and what I'm telling the viewers, this is a radical moment and a change in relations between the Jews and Christians. Why? Because historically, Christians have been some of the worst anti-Semites and haters of the Jews. Yeah. Going back to the early church, going back to the Crusaders.
Well, you could add in Martin Luther. I mean, he's quoted 3 times in Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler.
That's right.
John Calvin was one of the biggest Jew haters.
Luther, when he started, he actually loved the Jews. He tried to evangelize the Jews, but they wouldn't listen. They were stiff-necked. So he turned against them, and he wrote a book called Against the Jews and Their Lies, which Hermann Goering used as Nazi propaganda, as you quoted. So very, very sad.
So because of that, the Jews have been very suspicious, particularly when you have Hitler taking the cross, right?
Absolutely.
And using the cross and the mixing of the swastika with the cross, with the, quote, German Christians in Germany. Yeah. And they dissolved their denominations and united under the Reich bishop, handpicked by Adolf Hitler. And so when the Jews see the cross, or when the Jews hear the word Christian, they're like, yeah, that's why you have to explain to them. Not too long ago, I did business with a Jewish businessman here in the Mid-South. And I explained to him right away who I was, what I did, and where I was coming from. And you just could see his body language relax. And we became friends. Wow. He's very intrigued by what I'm doing. Wow. And he said, you know, what's very interesting is you're more interested in Israel than many of my own Jewish friends. Wow. He said, you have more of an interest in Israel than my own Jewish friends.
And that's great to hear.
But I explained to him, hey, look, the so-called Christian world's full of anti-Semites. Yeah. And he knows it, but he didn't know that replacement theology had become so popular in so many of the churches. I mean, his business is not far from one church that's teaching the rapture's already occurred, you know. Preterism, partial preterism. Crazy. And those people, of course, have completely replaced Israel, right?
That's what the theology teaches. But how can you be an anti-Semitic Christian when your Messiah is a Jew?
Yeah.
It's crazy. But going back to these Christians who are building bridges with the Jewish community, I've heard with my own ears the leader speaking to a Christian group saying, I would never step foot in a church. I would not even speak to Christians. That's how much anti-sentiments we Jews have towards the Christians because of what the Christians have done to us.
The history.
The history. And now they're saying, and this is the big thing, this is the crux of the point. They're saying, we recognize that in the last days, the Gentiles have a major part to play in end-time prophecy. This is coming.
You do explain to them that us American Christians or Australian Christians or New Zealand Christians, whoever they might be, but speaking as American, you do explain to them that their American Christians, like myself, are just disgusted with these American Christians that act that way and believe that way, right?
Yeah. Oh, of course I do.
And by the way, they probably like us less than they like some of the Jews. I mean,
that's the irony.
They say, House, he's a Zionist. House, he's a Zionist. I'm like, no, I'm actually a Christian Zionist. Let's get it right.
Big difference. Big difference. No.
They dislike me as much as they dislike the Jews, or maybe more.
Right.
So make sure your friends in Israel know that we're just as disgusted with those Christians in America that teach this and believe this as they are.
And they know that there's a difference between Christians and Christians, just like they know that there's a difference between Jews and Jews.
Yeah.
So, but this is radical, and it's based on that verse that I shared, where the Lord, where in the book of Exodus, my house will be a house of prayer for all nations. They are seeing it. They may have known that verse, they may have quoted that verse, but now it's become a revelation to them. Their eyes are opening. They are seeing. And the fact that the Gentiles are providing these red heifers, this is enforcing it. Now, again, I shared this the last time I spoke back in Israel. I shared that I'm getting a bit of opposition speaking about the rebuilding of the temple by Christians, by Messianic Jews.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Why?
I'll tell you why. Because they say, number one, we don't need a temple.
Well, we agree with that.
And we agree with that. Absolutely. We don't. The book of Hebrews deals with that.
But do they not realize if you don't have a temple, the Bible ends up being false? Prophecy's not fulfilled?
Yeah, well...
And then that's a real problem for all of us.
Yeah, true. So let me say that there is a theology out there which I personally, I don't agree with, but some Messianic Jewish scholars teach it, that where Paul talks in 2 Thessalonians about a man of lawlessness will be revealed. Mm-hmm. He will sit in the temple of God as God. They interpret that verse, the temple of God being the body of Christ. Because Paul says in Corinthians, we are the temple of God.
Right.
And so they say that this Antichrist, he will actually be one of us. He will sit in the temple of God, the church, and he will, what does it say? He will sit in the temple of God as God. Now, one of the ways they interpret that verse is they say, potentially the Pope. He sits in the temple of God in the church, and historically, some of the popes have said they are God's representative
they all
on
teach
earth.
That. No, they all teach that. When they sit in the chair, you know,
Exactly.
They are
Pontificating and all of that.
Yes,
But
yes.
but
They're the vicar of Christ on earth. That's what they teach.
Exactly. But there's another reason why some Messianic scholars and believers are against it, is because there are a number of Christians out there that, instead of supporting the body of Christ or the Messianic believers in Israel, and we need support, they actually send money to help rebuild the temple. And I can understand I can understand believers being upset with that. I mean, should we be?
I'm not going to spend money to rebuild the
Neither
temple
am I.
because I know what the temple is going to be used for.
That's right.
But I am interested in watching it because it tells me where we're at on God's calendar.
That's it. And that's
But
why...
I'm not going to donate money to build it.
No, and that's
what,
why...
I'm going to donate to build a building that can offer up sacrifices when there's already been a sacrifice, or that the Antichrist is going to use? I'm not going to do that.
Well, there are believers in number. I don't know what kind of number, but there are believers who are big time supporting it. Big time. So
when we talk about it, that doesn't mean we're supporting it.
That's right. It's kind of almost like when the Lord said before his coming, it's going to be like Sodom and Gomorrah. We know it's got to happen. We know it's going to increase. Do we support that? No, we don't support it. But these are signs it's going to happen. I believe in our generation, I've said this a number of times on your program, I believe in our generation, we're going to see it. This next Pesach, next Passover, I don't know. I mean, we're talking about a few months away, but
what are the odds that you end up with they end up over there with a tabernacle, a temporary tabernacle, while they're waiting for the temple to be built?
Yeah, no question that's a highly possible.
That can happen. That's possible.
It is. The issue is not necessarily it being a King Herod-like or King Solomon-like temple. That's not the number one priority. The number one priority is an altar for sacrifice. And a tabernacle can easily be put together in a matter of hours, potentially. The tabernacle that was in Shiloh was there for 369 years. The tabernacle that was in the wilderness moved from place to place as the cloud, as the fire moved. So that's not the major issue. Of course, the major issue is where it's going to be built. And that's going to be the Temple Mount. There's only going to be one place. And that issue is still probably the number one question that I don't have an answer for. How? How is it going to happen?
Well, what if again, the Antichrist shows up, confirms a peace treaty, and says, now put up your temple?
So, okay, this is the other reason why I'm seeing the movement of or rather, let me rephrase it. The fact that the Jewish leaders who are involved in the rebuilding of the temple, they are so keen on the Gentiles being part of it. What a lot of our viewers may not know, that in Israel, we've got a strong right wing, we've got a strong left wing, but among our left wing, and even among a lot of our right wingers, there is this ecumenical push.
Yeah, there's this interfaith dialogue.
This interfaith dialogue. There's a new museum downtown Jerusalem called the Museum of Tolerance. In a major area market in Jerusalem, on the ceiling, there's hands being held by all different faiths, different peoples.
And Pope Francis has been pushing this. Pope Benedict pushed this.
What some people don't know, that there is a wall, a road being built around the old city of Jerusalem, and that road is going to be an international road. This was implemented by the late Shimon Peres, who was an extreme left-winger, one of the propagators of the Oslo Peace Accords with Yasser Arafat. He was terribly deceived, along with Yitzhak Rabin, who was assassinated because of this. So while it may look good that the Gentile Christians are involved and that the Jewish people are going ahead and building, we know that at some stage there's going to be a great deception. And this is why we need to be on our guard. We need to be watchmen. We need to be praying for the situation. But ultimately, I think another reason why I'm excited about the temple is that the whole issue of sacrifice of sins, that whole topic, is going to be talked about. And this hopefully will be a great platform for us, Messianics, live in the land, and you Christians who get in touch, cross paths with Jewish people. We got to get the message out there that Jesus, Yeshua, he came, he was crucified, Isaiah 53. All we like sheep have gone astray, everyone has gone to his own way. Adonai ifgia bo et avon kulano, but the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. And this is the great news. This is the thing that set me free, Brannon, when I was 19 years old, way back in that place called New Zealand. That's where my accent comes from.
But you've been in Israel for how long?
I've lived there now. I just celebrated my 31st year.
Wow.
But I still have my New Zealand accent.
Yes, you do.
Although, I personally think being here in America, especially down in places like Tennessee, I actually think I don't have an accent. Y'all have an accent.
Yeah, we do.